Hello, and welcome back to TA Family Drama, where we dive deep into the currents of human emotion and the often hidden complexities of family life. I'm your host, and today we're unraveling a story of quiet erasure and ultimate self-reclamation. This is the true account of Evelyn, a woman whose lifelong struggle for acknowledgement in her overbearing family reached a breaking point when her greatest achievement, her PhD defense, was ignored in favor of a family wedding scheduled at the same time. Blindsided and betrayed, she discovered a hidden truth beneath a bridal sofa, a family secret symbolized by a cursed blue diamond, exposing decades of silent erasure and unresolved wounds. Before we begin, please like, share, and subscribe to help us reach 1,000 followers and keep these stories coming. As the saying goes, the truth will set you free, but first, it will make you miserable. No. This story is a testament to that, offering a profound lesson on betrayal, silent neglect, and the true cost of setting an unbreakable boundary. Now, let's start the journey. What would you do if the people you loved most quietly erased you from their happiest day, forcing you to choose a new name and a new life just to be seen? The silence of my apartment at 9:00 p.m. was a different creature from the silence of the morning. In the morning, the silence was expectant, a blank canvas waiting for the day to strike its first mark. At night, however, the silence was heavy, saturated with the unsaid things that had accumulated over 12 hours. I stood by the kitchen island, the quartz countertop cool against my palms, staring at the takeout container from the high-end sushi place down on 17th Street. It was my third night in a row eating yellowtail sashimi standing up. My apartment, perched on the 20th floor, was a masterpiece of modern design. It was the kind of place that appeared in architectural digests under headlines like Urban Sanctuary or The Minimalist Executive. I had the Eames lounge chair I had coveted since business school. I had the hand-scraped walnut dining table that could seat 10 people, though it had never seated more than one. I had the floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the Denver skyline, a glittering grid of amber and white lights against the imposing black silhouette of the Front Range. From the outside looking in, I was the poster child for the American dream realized. I was Elise Warren, the girl from Toledo who made it out, who climbed the corporate ladder in 6-inch heels and didn't look back. But looking at my reflection in the darkened glass, I didn't see a conqueror. I saw a ghost haunting her own life. The funny thing about success, the kind that pays in 6 figures and stock options, is how effectively it masks the rot underneath. I had spent the last decade building a fortress of competence. At the office, I was indispensable. I was the one they called when the numbers didn't add up, when the merger was stalling, when the projections needed to be bulletproof. I thrived in the boardroom because the rules there were explicit. You provide value, you get rewarded. You solve a problem, you get a bonus. It was a transactional intimacy that I understood perfectly. It was safe, it was clean. Home was where the logic fell apart. I moved to the dining table, sliding the takeout box onto the wood. The chair scraped softly against the floor, a sound that seemed deafening in the quiet. I sat down, facing the empty chair opposite me. I used to imagine inviting friends over, hosting dinner parties with wine and laughter, the kind I saw in movies or on my colleagues' Instagram feeds. But I never did. To invite someone in was to risk them seeing the cracks. To let someone get close was to admit that I didn't know how to be a person outside of my utility. My phone sat next to my chopsticks, silent now, but its black screen felt like a watching eye. The banking app was still open in the background, and that transfer of $12,000 was still pending in my mind. I took a bite of tuna, but it tasted like nothing. Ash. Why hadn't I transferred it yet? It wasn't the money. I had checked my portfolio earlier, the market had a good day, and my unrealized gains alone covered that $12,000. It would be so easy to just pay it, to buy the silence, to ensure that my father didn't have to face the humiliation of an eviction notice. That was the script, wasn't it? The dutiful daughter swoops in, cape fluttering, checkbook open. But tonight, the script felt like a noose. I thought about the hours I worked. I was legendary at the firm for being the first in and the last out. People called it dedication. They called it drive. They didn't know that I stayed in the office until 8:00 p.m. because the thought of returning to this beautiful, empty apartment made my chest ache. At the office, I was Elise the VP. Here, I was just Elise, the daughter who wasn't quite enough. It wasn't that my parents were monsters. That would be easier, in a way. If they were cruel, purely and simply, I could hate them. I could cut them off and feel righteous about it. But they weren't monsters. They were just absent. They were hollowed out by their own struggles and mediocrity, and they had nothing left to give me. Except demands. I remembered a moment from 3 years ago. I had just been promoted to vice president, the youngest in the division's history. I had called home, bursting with the news, my heart hammering with a childish hope that this time, finally, it would be big enough. This time, they would look at me with the same awe they reserved for my brother whenever he managed to hold down a job for more than 3 months. "That's nice, honey," Mom had said, her voice distracted by the sound of a game show on the TV in the background. "Does that mean you get a raise? Because the transmission on the Chevy is acting up again." I had hung up and cried for an hour in the bathroom stall of a Michelin star restaurant, not because of the money I bought them the transmission, but because of the immediate, instinctive pivot. My joy was not a shared emotion. It was a resource to be harvested. To them, my success was not a reflection of my character or my hard work. It was a lucky strike that they felt entitled to mine. I wasn't their child. I was their retirement plan, their emergency fund, their winning lottery ticket that walked and talked. And the worst part, the part that terrified me as I sat there in the dark, I had let it happen. I had trained them to treat me this way. Every time I sent a check without asking questions, every time I solved a crisis they created, every time I swallowed my hurt and prioritized their comfort, I was teaching them that I had no needs. I was teaching them that Elise doesn't need care. Elise provides care. I had become an infrastructure project, not a human being. I pushed the food away, my appetite gone. The pain in my chest flared again, a sharp reminder of the physical reality I was trying to ignore. My cardiologist had been very clear. Stress is a killer, Elise. Your heart is structurally sound now, but the engine is running too hot. You cannot keep carrying the weight of the world. "I'm not carrying the world," I had told him, buttoning my blouse with trembling fingers. "Just a mortgage in Ohio." He hadn't laughed. I stood up and walked to the window, pressing my hand against the cold glass. Below me, the city was a river of light. Somewhere down there, people were having arguments, making up, hugging their children, worrying about bills they couldn't pay. I had paid all my bills. I had paid my parents' bills. I had paid for the right to stand in this tower and look down. But tonight, the view offered no comfort. Tonight, I realized that the transaction was fraudulent. I had bought a life that looked perfect but felt like a waiting room. I was waiting for permission to stop running. I was waiting for someone to tell me I had done enough. My reflection in the window seemed to mock me. "You are waiting for people who are incapable of seeing you," it whispered. "You are starving to death at a banquet you paid for." A notification pinged on my phone, a text from my brother, Dean. "Hey sis, Mom said you're being weird about the rent money. Don't stress her out, okay? She's got high blood pressure. Just handle it. Just handle it." The phrase echoed in the empty room. Just handle it. That was my epitaph. Here lies Elise. She handled it. I looked at the text, then at the sprawling city, then at the scar beneath my silk shirt. A strange sensation washed over me, not anger, not yet. It was a cold, lucid, terrifying clarity. I was a high-performance machine that was beginning to malfunction. The gears were grinding. The oil was running low. And the operators my family didn't care about maintenance. They only cared that the output kept coming. If I sent that money tonight, I would be buying another month of peace. But I would also be selling another piece of my soul. And looking at the sheer drop from the 20th floor, I realized I was running out of soul to sell. The hollowness inside me wasn't just loneliness anymore. It was an echo chamber, and for the first time, I was terrified of what might scream back if I stayed in this silence much longer. I didn't reply to Dean. I didn't open the banking app. I turned off the lights, leaving the apartment in total darkness, save for the city glow. I needed to sleep. But as I walked to the bedroom, passing the expensive, empty furniture. I knew that sleep wouldn't fix this. You can't sleep off the realization that your entire life is a beautiful, expensive cage, and you are the one holding the key, too afraid to turn it. Tomorrow, I will have to make a choice, not about the money, but about whether I wanted to survive my life or actually live it. The crack in the foundation had appeared. The question was, would I patch it up again, or would I let the whole house come crashing down? The next morning, the Denver skyline was a jagged cut of blue and steel, indifferent to my lack of sleep. I arrived at the firm at 6:45 a.m., a habit that had long ago ceased to be about ambition and had become a structural necessity, like a load-bearing wall in a house that was slowly sinking. The office of Sterling and Partners was a cathedral of capitalism. Located on the 35th floor, it smelled of espresso, ozone, and expensive cologne. My heels clicked against the polished travertine floor with a rhythm that used to sound like power. Click-clack, click-clack. The sound of a woman who knows exactly where she is going. Today, however, it sounded like a countdown. Morning. Elise, you're here early. Again. I looked up to see Marcus, one of the senior partners, leaning against the doorframe of my corner office. He was holding a bagel and looking at me with that mixture of admiration and pity that high-functioning workaholics reserve for one another. Market doesn't sleep. Marcus, I said, dropping my leather tote onto the desk. It was a reflex, a pre-recorded line from the script of The Successful Executive. We closed the bewildered deal last night, he said, nodding at my monitor. Saw your notes on the valuation spread. You caught that discrepancy in the EBITDA adjustments. Saved us about $2 million on the buy side. Client is ecstatic. Just doing the math, I replied, booting up my terminal. No, Elise, you see things other people miss. You're a surgeon with a spreadsheet. He took a bite of his bagel, then paused. Speaking of surgeons, shouldn't you be taking it easy? It's been, 10 days since the procedure. My hand froze on the mouse. The reminder was physical, a tight, pulling sensation in my chest where the sternum was knitting back together. I'm fine, I lied. The words tasted like ash. Clearance to work light duty. Right, light duty. Is that why you were logged in until midnight? Marcus shook his head, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. Go home early today, Warren. That's an order. The mountains aren't going anywhere. He left, and I was alone with the humming silence of my success. I sat there, surrounded by the trappings of the life I was supposed to want. My name was on the door in frosted glass. I had a view that tourists paid money to see. My bank account balance was a number that would have made my grandfather in Toledo weep. By every metric of the American definition of happiness, I had won the game. But as I opened my email and watched the unread count tick up, I felt a familiar, cavernous hollow opening up inside my ribcage. It wasn't just the stress, it was the absolute crushing irrelevance of it all. I had saved the firm $2 million yesterday. $2 million, a number so large it was abstract, and yet the only number that mattered in my real life was $12,000. That was the price of my father's dignity this month. I opened a spreadsheet, the cells blurring slightly. I worked because it was the only place where the inputs match the outputs. Here, if I put in effort, I get a result. If I solved a problem, I was thanked, or at least paid. It was a clean equation. Home was where the math broke. I worked through lunch. I worked through the afternoon slump. I took a conference call with a client in London and charmed them in fluent, technical legalese. I was brilliant. I was exhausted. I was a hollow shell painted in gold leaf. Around 6:00 p.m., the office began to empty out. This was a dangerous time. The adrenaline of the trading day faded, leaving behind the stark reality of the evening ahead. Most of my colleagues were rushing home to something: dinner reservations, kids' soccer practice, spouses who would ask, "How was your day?" and actually listen to the answer. I had a reservation with a microwave meal and a text message thread that was currently a standoff. I stayed. I opened a new file, a low-priority audit that didn't need to be done until next week. I started working on it. Not because it was urgent, but because as long as I was here, I was Elise, the vice president. As soon as I stepped into the elevator, I would revert to Elise the bank. It was 8:30 p.m. when the cleaning crew arrived. The vacuum cleaner's roar was my cue. I packed up my things, the movements mechanical. The drive home was a blur of taillights on I-25. I guided my Audi through the traffic, the heated seat soothing the ache in my back. This car costs more than the house I grew up in. I gripped the leather steering wheel, thinking about that house. The peeling paint, the drafty windows, the constant low-level hum of anxiety about the electric bill. I had run so fast and so hard to get away from that anxiety. I had built a fortress of assets and liquidity. But sitting at a red light, watching the snow begin to fall, I realized the cruelest joke of all. I hadn't escaped the poverty. I had just changed its form. My parents were poor in money. I was poor in everything else. I pulled into the underground garage of my building, parking in my assigned spot. The elevator ride to the 20th floor took 45 seconds. I counted them. 45 seconds to prepare the mask. When I unlocked my door, the apartment was exactly as I had left it, pristine, cold, and silent. The air conditioner hummed. The city lights spilled across the floor like spilled milk. I walked to the kitchen and poured a glass of water, taking my evening medication, beta blockers, to keep the heart rhythm steady, to keep the engine from exploding. I sat at the head of the dining table, that beautiful hand-scraped walnut slab that I had bought to celebrate my first big bonus. It was meant for Thanksgiving dinners. It was meant for laughter. Now, it was just a surface to hold my phone. I unlocked the screen. No new messages from Mom. No. Are you okay? No, we're worried about you. Just the silence of a creditor waiting for payment. I scrolled up to the old messages. Happy birthday, Elise. Hope you have a great day. By the way, the water heater blew. 3 years ago. Congrats on the promotion. Your Uncle Jerry needs a loan for his truck. Can you call him? 5 years ago. We miss you. When are you visiting? Bring cash. The banks here are a hassle. Last Christmas. I put the phone down, face down. This was the tragedy. I realized, tracing the grain of the wood with my fingernail. It wasn't the money. If they had asked for the money with love, with gratitude, with a recognition of the cost, I would have given it gladly. I would have given them the world. But they didn't see the cost. They didn't see the 60-hour weeks. They didn't see the panic attacks in the bathroom. They didn't see the surgery scar. To them, my money was a natural resource, like rain, like sunlight. You don't thank the rain for falling. You just complain when there's a drought. And the thing that terrified me, the thing that made my breath hitch in my chest as I sat alone in my dark, expensive tower, was that I had accepted this. I had normalized it. I had spent 20 years believing that love was a transaction. If I pay, I am good. If I provide, I am worthy. I had trained myself to be a utility. I had hollowed myself out to become a vessel for their needs, hoping that one day, if I filled their cup enough times, they would look at the pitcher and say, "Thank you." But pitchers don't get thanked. Pitchers get emptied. And then, when they crack, they get thrown away. I looked at the reflection of the room in the dark window, a woman sitting alone at a table for 10, a woman who had everything and nothing. The familiarity of the pain was the most dangerous part. It felt like a warm blanket. It would be so easy to just transfer the money, to fix the problem, to get the dopamine hit of being the savior, to go to sleep, telling myself I was a good daughter. But tonight, the silence in the room felt different. It was vibrating. My finger hovered over the banking app again. The confirm transfer button pulsed on the screen. $12,000. I looked at the scar on my chest. I looked at the snow falling outside, covering the world in white. I didn't press send, not yet. Instead, I closed my eyes and let a memory wash over me, not from the boardroom, but from a kitchen in Toledo, 28 years ago, the smell of burnt toast and the sound of a shattering jar. The moment I learned that truth didn't matter, only blame did. If I wanted to understand why I was sitting here alone in a penthouse, unable to say no to a robbery disguised as family duty, I had to go back there, back to the source of the infection. I stood up and walked away from the table, leaving the phone behind. The red notification light blinked in the darkness, a tiny, angry eye. Let it blink. Tonight. I was going to travel back in time, to Ohio, to the beginning of the debt that could never be paid. To understand the $12,000, you have to understand the layout of a small, vinyl-sided house on the outskirts of Toledo, Ohio. You have to understand the specific texture of the air inside it, a heavy, static-charged atmosphere that smelled of fried onions, damp drywall, and the metallic tang of anxiety. Toledo in the 90s was a place where dreams went to rust. In our house, money wasn't just a currency, it was a weather system. We didn't talk about it, but we lived in its climate. If Dad got overtime, it was sunny. If the furnace broke, it was a hurricane. And I learned very early that my survival depended on being the barometer, predicting the storms before they hit. But I wasn't always a weather station. Once, I was just a child. The memory that usually surfaces first is from when I was 9 years old. It was a Tuesday, late afternoon. The jagged sunlight of strictly rationed heating cut across the linoleum floor of the kitchen. My brother, Dean, was 11 then. He was the golden boy, not because he was particularly gifted, but because he was fragile. He had fallen out of a tree when he was 6 and suffered a concussion that became the defining mythology of our family. Dean needs rest. Dean gets confused. Be gentle with Dean. He was bored that day, bouncing a rubber super ball against the kitchen cabinets. Thwack, thwack, thwack. Dean, stop it, I had whispered, doing my homework at the kitchen table. Mom's going to be home any minute. He ignored me, grinning. He wound up for a fastball, hurling the hard rubber sphere. It missed the cabinet door and smashed directly into a glass jar of strawberry jam sitting on the counter. The sound was explosive. Glass shrapnel flew across the room, and a thick, red slurry of jam splattered onto the white cupboards, the floor, and the hem of Dean's jeans. We both froze. The back door opened. Mom walked in, carrying 2 bags of groceries. Her shoulders slumped with the weight of a double shift at the diner. She looked at the mess. The red puddle looked like a crime scene on the cheap linoleum. Dean's eyes went wide, filling with instant practice tears. He didn't say a word. He just looked at her, then looked at me. And I saw the calculation happen in my mother's eyes. She looked at Dean, her fragile, concussed boy who couldn't handle stress. Then she looked at me, Elise, the quiet one, the sturdy one. "Elise!" she snapped, dropping the bags. "What is wrong with you? Can't you be careful for 5 minutes?" I opened my mouth to speak. It wasn't me. It was Dean. The truth was right there, sitting on my tongue. But I looked at Dean's trembling lip, and I looked at the exhaustion etched into the lines around my mother's mouth. She didn't want the truth. She wanted a solution. She wanted a culprit who could handle the blame so she could move on to cooking dinner. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "Clean it up," she sighed, stepping over the mess to comfort Dean, who was now sobbing softly as if he were the victim. "Come on, Dean. Let's get you washed up. Elise made a mess again." I spent the next hour on my hands and knees, picking shards of glass out of sticky red goo. My knees hurt against the hard floor. The smell of artificial strawberry became nauseating. But the real pain wasn't the labor. It was the injustice that settled into my bones like a fine dust. I learned a lesson that day that no business school would ever teach me in this family. My role is to absorb the impact so others can stay whole. If that was the lesson on culpability, the lesson on visibility came 4 years later. I was 13. I had discovered that numbers didn't lie. Numbers didn't blame you for things you didn't do. I buried myself in algebra and geometry, finding comfort in the clean, undeniable logic of equations. At the end of 8th grade, I was awarded the district's Young Mathematician Scholarship. It was a big deal, $500 towards college, and a certificate presented at a ceremony at the high school auditorium. $500 was a fortune to me. It felt like a ticket out. I told my parents 3 weeks in advance. I put the invitation on the refrigerator, held up by a magnet shaped like a slice of pizza. "That's nice, honey," Mom had said, not looking up from her coupon clipping. "It's at 7:00 p.m. on Friday," I reminded her. "I have to wear a dress." Friday came. I ironed my own dress, a navy blue velvet thing I'd found at Goodwill. It was slightly too big in the shoulders, but I cinched it with a belt and thought I looked professional. I felt important. I felt seen. "Dad's truck is acting up," Mom said at 6:30 p.m., wiping the counter. "And Dean has a stomachache. I don't think we can make it. Elise." I stood in the hallway, clutching my index cards for the speech I didn't need to give. "But it's just 2 miles away. We can walk. Or I can get a ride with Mrs. Miller, and you can meet me there." "Don't be selfish, Elise," she said, her voice sharp. "Your brother is sick. You know how he gets. Go with Mrs. Miller. We'll celebrate later." I rode with Mrs. Miller, my math teacher. She asked where my parents were. I lied and said my father had the flu. The auditorium was packed, hundreds of parents, cameras flashing, flowers wrapped in crinkly plastic. I sat in the front row, the velvet dress itching my skin. When the principal called my name, Elise Warren, first place, I walked up the wooden stairs. The spotlight was blindingly hot. I took the certificate. I shook the principal's hand, and then I did the thing every child does. I looked out into the darkness to find my people. I scanned the rows. I looked for my father's gray flannel jacket. I looked for my mother's curly hair. I looked for anyone who shared my blood, anyone who was there to witness that I was special, that I was good. There was only a sea of strangers. The applause washed over me, but it sounded hollow, like rain on a tin roof. I stood there, holding the proof of my worth, and I felt smaller than I ever had in my life. I wasn't a winner. I was a solitary point on a graph, unconnected to any line. When I got home later that night, the house was quiet. The TV was flickering blue light across the living room. Dean was asleep on the sofa, a bowl of popcorn on his chest. Mom was folding laundry. "How was it?" she asked, not stopping her folding. "I won," I said, placing the certificate on the table. "I was the only one from my school." "That's good," she said. Then she paused and looked at me, her expression shifting into that familiar admonishment. "But don't make too big a deal out of it. Elise, you don't want people to think you're arrogant. Nobody likes a show-off. Don't make a big deal out of it." A week later, Dean managed to assemble a model aeroplane without gluing his fingers together. Mom put it on the mantel. She told the neighbors. She bought him a celebratory ice cream cake. "He stuck with it," she beamed. "I'm so proud of him." I ate my slice of cake in silence, the sugar turning to acid in my stomach. The disparity wasn't subtle. It was a bludgeon. Dean's mediocrity was celebrated because it required effort for him to be normal. My excellence was ignored because it was expected. I was the engine that ran in the background, necessary, reliable, and invisible until I malfunctioned. I didn't realize it then. I didn't have the language for it at 13, but that was the moment the transaction was codified. I internalized a terrifying truth. I am not lovable for who I am. I am only tolerated for what I can do. If I wanted their attention, I wouldn't get it by being smart. I wouldn't get it by being good. I would only get it by being useful. And if I wasn't useful, if I stopped fixing things, if I stopped absorbing the blame, then I was nothing. I was just a mouth to feed, a burden. 30 years later, sitting in my penthouse in Denver, I could still feel the phantom itch of that cheap velvet dress. The logic held up. Why did I feel obligated to send $12,000 to people who couldn't be bothered to watch me receive a scholarship? Because the terrified 13-year-old inside me was still standing on that stage, scanning the dark auditorium, desperate to buy a ticket into the family. I wasn't sending rent money. I was paying a retroactive admission fee. I was paying them to look at me, but the bank was closed, and the currency I was paying with was my own life. I opened my eyes. The apartment was pitch black now. The snow had stopped. I knew what I had to do. Or rather, I knew what I couldn't do anymore. The little girl in the velvet dress was tired of waiting. I picked up the phone. I didn't open the banking app. Instead, I opened my photo gallery and scrolled back. Not to the recent photos of my surgery, but further back. to a photo I had sent them a week before the heart attack. The inciting incident wasn't the phone call this morning. It had started 7 days ago, and it was time to examine the crack that had finally brought the dam down. The memory I dug up from my phone was dated exactly 7 days before the morning of the eviction call. It was a photo that represented the pinnacle of my professional life. The setting was the boardroom of Sterling and Partners, a room paneled in mahogany and glass, suspended 35 floors above the city. In the foreground of the photo was a sleek, leather-bound dossier titled Project Zenith Acquisition Strategy, and behind it, slightly out of focus but undeniably triumphant, was me. I was wearing my power suit, a charcoal Armani number that fit like armor. My hair was pulled back, sharp and severe. But my eyes, if you zoomed in on my eyes, you could see a fire that rarely burned there. It was the day I had closed the Titan deal, $480 million. It wasn't just a number. It was 6 months of sleepless nights, of battling a team of aggressive investment bankers from New York who thought they could steamroll the girl from Denver. It was complex financial modeling that looked like hieroglyphics to anyone else. I had spotted a leverage opportunity they missed. I had outmaneuvered them. I had won. When the final signatures were dry, Marcus had popped a bottle of Dom Perignon. To Elise, he had toasted, the bubbles hissing in the crystal flutes. The sharpest knife in the drawer. I had sipped the champagne, feeling the adrenaline vibrate in my fingertips. I felt powerful. I felt validated. But as the celebration wound down and the boardroom emptied, that familiar ache returned, the ache of the empty auditorium. I wanted to share this, not with Marcus, who saw me as an asset, not with my colleagues, who saw me as competition. I wanted to share it with the people whose last name I bore. I wanted to show them, look at what I built from the scraps you gave me. Look at how far I flew with the wings you never thought I had. So, I took that photo. I captioned it. Just closed the biggest deal of my life. $480 million. The team is celebrating, felt like you should know. I hit send. I sat in my office for 20 minutes, watching the 3 dots appear and disappear on the screen. My heart was pounding harder than it had during the negotiations. Why was I still this desperate? I was 37 years old. Why did I still need a gold star from a woman who hadn't balanced a checkbook in 10 years? Finally, the phone buzzed. Mom, that's nice. You look tired in the picture. By the way, the kitchen sink is leaking again. When are you going to send someone to fix it? It smells like mold. I stared at the screen. I read it again. That's nice. 2 words. The same 2 words she had used for the math scholarship 24 years ago. And then, immediately, the pivot, the sink, the mold, the demand. There was no good job, no we're proud of you, no wow, that's a lot of money, and just a cursory acknowledgement that I existed, followed by a reminder of my function. It hit me then with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't just that she didn't care. It was something far more insidious. She wasn't impressed by the $480 million deal because, in her mind, my success wasn't mine. It was ours. To her, my career wasn't a journey of personal self-actualization. It was just a bigger harvest. If the family cow produces more milk, you don't congratulate the cow. You just buy a bigger bucket. She asked about the kitchen sink with such casual entitlement because she genuinely believed that the purpose of my closing a $500 million deal was to ensure she could afford a plumber. My victory was only relevant insofar as it served the ecosystem of the house in Ohio. I put the phone down on my desk, my hand shaking. Elise. I looked up. My assistant, Sarah, was standing in the doorway, looking concerned. Are you okay? You look pale. I'm fine, I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. Just tired. You should go home, she said gently. You've been running on fumes for months. I nodded, but I didn't go home. I couldn't. The thought of my silent apartment was unbearable. Instead, I stayed. I worked. I buried myself in this next project, trying to drown out the voice of my mother in my head. When are you going to fix it? But my body knew what my mind refused to acknowledge. That was the night my chest started to hurt. A tight, squeezing pressure, like a fist closing around my heart. I ignored it. I took an aspirin. I told myself it was heartburn. It wasn't heartburn. 3 days later, I collapsed in the elevator. I woke up in the ICU, wires taped to my chest, a tube in my nose. The doctor told me I had a congenital valve defect that stress had aggravated to the breaking point. "You're lucky," he said. "Another few days and you might not have woken up." I lay there in the hospital bed, the sterile air humming around me. I had my phone. I could have called them. "Mom, I almost died. Mom, I'm scared." But I looked at that text message again. The kitchen sink is leaking. If I told her I was in the hospital, her first thought wouldn't be for my heart. It would be, who is going to pay for the sink now? The realization was so cold, so absolute, that it numbed the physical pain of the surgery. I didn't call them. I went through the surgery alone. I recovered alone. I paid the hospital bill alone. And then, a week later, came the call about the eviction. The timing wasn't a coincidence. The universe has a dark sense of humor. Just as I was physically stitching myself back together, trying to keep my literal heart from failing, they were asking me to tear myself apart again for their financial survival. The $480 million deal, the sink, the eviction, they were all connected by a single, invisible thread, the assumption. The assumption that I was infinite. The assumption that I had no breaking point. But everyone has a breaking point. Even the cow, even the machine, even the dutiful daughter who had spent 37 years trying to buy love. I sat in my apartment, staring at the photo of my triumph that had been met with a request for plumbing repairs. I deleted the photo from the chat thread. It was a petty act, meaningless in the grand scheme of things, but it felt like a start. I wasn't going to fix the sink. And I wasn't going to fix the eviction, not because I was cruel, but because I finally understood the terrifying truth that my mother had inadvertently revealed. As long as I kept fixing things, they would never see me as anything other than a tool. I stood up. My legs felt stronger than they had in days. The ghost of the 13-year-old girl in the velvet dress was fading, replaced by the woman who had stared down Wall Street bankers. I had a new deal to negotiate, and this time, the terms were going to be non-negotiable. But first, I had to understand the other side of the table. I had to understand why my father, the man who taught me to ride a bike, had become a ghost in his own life, and why my brother, the boy I used to protect, had become a parasite. Empathy is a dangerous thing. It can trap you, or it can set you free. I needed to find the kind that cut like a scalpel. That night, sleep was a foreign country I couldn't visit. Instead, I sat cross-legged on the $3,000 sheepskin rug in my living room, spreading out a fan of old family photographs. The blue ambient light from the skyscrapers outside filtered in, turning the smiling faces in the glossy 4x6 prints into flickering ghosts. When you are in the eye of the storm of hurt, it is easy to turn the people who wound you into monsters. Anger craves a simple target. I wanted to hate them. I wanted to believe my mother was a calculating villain, my father a heartless coward, and my brother a shameless parasite. That narrative would have been so tidy. If they were the villains, then I was the hero, and cutting them off would feel like a triumph of justice. But life, cruelly, is not written by lazy Hollywood screenwriters. It is messier, and therefore infinitely more painful. I picked up a photo of my mother at 40, roughly the age I was approaching now. I didn't see a wicked stepmother. I saw a woman with hollowed-out eyes and hands roughened by cheap bleach. I remembered the Friday nights in Toledo, seeing her hunched over the kitchen table, surrounded by a fortress of overdue bills and a ledger filled with numbers that had been scribbled out and rewritten until the paper tore. My mother wasn't born cold. She froze because she was terrified. She grew up in a home where dinner tonight didn't guarantee breakfast tomorrow. For her, poverty wasn't just a lack of funds. It was a trauma that lived in the marrow of her bones, a monster constantly scratching at the door. To Mom, money wasn't a tool for enjoyment. It was sandbags against a flood. She didn't love my money for luxury. She still wore coats she bought at Goodwill 10 years ago. She loved my money because it was the only reinforced concrete she could hold on to in a world that felt perpetually on the verge of collapse. She didn't praise my success because, in her fear-riddled worldview, success was fragile, praise was a jinx, pride was a luxury they couldn't afford. She only cared about the function of that success. Could it fix the roof? Could it pay the electric bill? Her motherly love had been crushed by survival mode into a ruthless pragmatism. She didn't look at me as a child who needed holding. She looked at me the way a general looks at a strategic reserve of ammunition. Thank God we won't die today. Then there was Dad. I held up a picture of him fixing my old bicycle, a screwdriver clamped between his teeth. He was smiling, a gentle, resigned smile. I used to blame him for being weak, for never standing between me and Mom's unreasonable demands. But now, viewing him through the lens of an adult who has tasted the bitterness of the world, I saw a man who had been defeated long ago. My father didn't choose silence because he didn't care. He chose it as a survival mechanism. He lived with a woman who was constantly at DEFCON 1 regarding finances, and he, a gentleman with a modest warehouse wage, always felt like the cause of that alarm. Every time he opened his mouth, it was a potential error. Every opinion could trigger a war over money. So, he learned to disappear. He hid in the garden, in the garage, in the blue glow of the television. He retreated into his shell to preserve whatever scrap of peace was left. Did he love me? Yes, I believe he did. But his love was the impotent affection of a bystander watching his child lift a car off the family, too ashamed to help because he knew he was too weak to lift it himself. His silence wasn't rejection. It was shame. He was ashamed that his daughter had become the patriarch he couldn't be. And finally, Dean. I looked at the photo of him at 12, his head wrapped in white gauze after falling from the oak tree. That was the moment time stopped for him. Before the fall, we were just siblings, fighting over the remote. After the fall, he became the chosen one of pity. The doctor said he needed rest. Mom translated that to mean Dean must never suffer discomfort. The entire family orbit shifted to revolve around his headaches, his confusion. He grew up with a pre-installed belief that he was a victim, that the world owed him priority because he had been hurt. He didn't intentionally become a parasite. He was trained to be one. We robbed him of the dignity of struggle. We robbed him of the chance to fail and stand up. Mom's smothering, and later my financial enabling, had frozen him in amber, a 40-year-old man with the emotional resilience of a 12-year-old boy waiting for Mom to kiss it better. Analyzing this in the cold light of logic, I felt a wave of profound empathy constrict my throat. They weren't villains. They were damaged people, trapped in the unhealed wounds of their own histories. They were victims of circumstance, of bad education, of fear. But and this is the massive, agonizing but that empathy didn't make it hurt less. In fact, it made it worse. Because if they were monsters, I could slay them. But they were pathetic. And that made my erosion at their hands a tragedy. The tragedy was this: because I was strong, because I was capable, because I could handle it from childhood, I had unknowingly signed an invisible contract. The contract stated Elise is infinite. To them, I wasn't a human being with limits. I was a bottomless well. You drop the bucket in, you pull up cool water. You never ask where the water comes from, or if the aquifer is running dry. Why ask? The bucket always comes up full. They didn't mean to hurt me. Mom didn't call demanding money to torture me. She called because she genuinely believed that $12,000 was nothing to me. She thought I could snap my fingers and money would materialize, like magic. She didn't see the sleepless nights, the chest pains, the loneliness, because I never let them see it. I had played the role of the hero so well that the audience believed I was bulletproof. They thought I couldn't be hurt. That is the most unintentional, yet devastating cruelty of all. When you are the strong one, nobody asks if you are okay. When you are the problem solver, nobody thinks you have problems. I remembered falling off my bike when I was 10. My knee was a bloody mess. I had limped home, tears stinging my eyes. But when I walked in and saw Mom fussing over Dean because he had a paper cut, I automatically wiped my face. I went to the bathroom, washed the gravel out of my own knee, bandaged it myself, and walked out to the kitchen. "Do you need help setting the table, Mom?" I had asked. I had taught them to treat me this way, and now, 30 years later, I was paying for that lesson with my life. I lay back on the rug, staring at the ceiling. This empathy was a double-edged sword. It helped me understand them, but it also illuminated the hopelessness of the relationship. They wouldn't change, not because they didn't want to, but because they couldn't. They were too addicted to the structure. My parents needed a rescuer, and my brother needed a sponsor. They needed me to stay in character for their fragile ecosystem to survive. But the cost of that ecosystem was my own destruction. I thought about my stitched-up heart. The doctor said it needed rest, but how could it rest when it was beating for 4 people? In the silent dark of the penthouse, a brutal truth crystallized. You can love the people who hurt you. You can understand why they do it. You can weep for their pain, but that does not obligate you to immolate yourself on the altar of their fear. Understanding is not forgiveness, and more importantly, understanding is not a suicide pact. I gathered the photos and placed them back in the oak box. The lid clicked shut with a finality that echoed in the room. I understood the anatomy of the ghost. I saw the gears behind the demands, and because I saw them so clearly, I knew that waiting for them to change was a delusion. If this script was going to change, I, the only character capable of rewriting it, had to pick up the pen. And the first line I needed to write was not a check. Tomorrow, I will do something I have never done. I would audit the cash flow I had poured into that black hole in Ohio. I needed to see the specific math of my sacrifice, not to ask for it back, but to wake myself up from the coma of toxic filial piety. And I knew, with a sinking dread, that what I was about to find would hurt more than any memory. The next morning, I didn't go to the office. I called Sarah, my assistant, and told her I was taking a sick day. "Cancel everything," I said, my voice so calm it surprised even me. "I have a personal matter to resolve." I sat in my home office, facing the 3 high-resolution monitors usually reserved for tracking global market volatility. But today, I wasn't looking at candlestick charts or the S&P 500. I was looking at my own banking history over the last 5 years. I am a data analyst by trade. I look for patterns. I look for anomalies. And as I began to piece together the financial puzzle of the Warren Family Fund, the sarcastic name I gave my savings account in my head, a devastating picture began to resolve. The pivotal event, the roof scandal, as I would come to call it, had happened just last September, only 2 months ago. I replayed the day in my mind, a gray Tuesday afternoon. Mom had called, her voice shrill with panic. An unseasonal storm had swept through Toledo, and an old oak branch had snapped, crashing through the shingles. "Water is pouring into the attic. Elise," she had cried, "the drywall in our bedroom is going to collapse." The contractor quoted $7,500 to re-roof and reinforce the frame. "I don't have it. Dad is trying to climb up there with a tarp, but it's still raining." The image of my father, a 65-year-old man with a bad back, climbing onto a slick roof in a storm, had triggered the emergency override in my brain. I didn't hesitate. "Get Dad off the roof," I had commanded, my fingers already typing the transfer code. "I'm sending $7,500 right now. Call the crew. Don't wait." "Thank you. Oh, God, thank you," Mom had sobbed. "You saved us." I had hung up, feeling a warm glow of utility. That was my role. The rescuer, the protector from afar. I went back to work, staying until 10:30 p.m. to make up for the distraction. But this morning, digging through my junk folder, I found an email I had missed 2 weeks ago. Sender Henderson, Home Repair. Subject outstanding invoice, Warren Residence. My heart skipped a beat. Outstanding invoice? I had wired the full amount the same day. I opened the PDF. Inside was a polite but firm note from Mr. Henderson, the decent old contractor my family had used for 20 years. "Hi, Elise. I know you're busy, but I still haven't received the balance for the roof job in September, Mrs. Warren paid the $1,500 deposit for materials, but we are still owed $6,000 for labor and disposal. She told me she was waiting for you to send the funds. Please advise." I read the numbers again. $1,500. I sent $7,500. Mom paid the contractor $1,500. Where did the other $6,000, 6,000 American dollars in cash go? My hands shook as I picked up my phone. I didn't call Mom. I called Mr. Henderson. "Mr. Henderson, it's Elise," I said, keeping my voice level. "I am so sorry for the delay. I'm wiring the $60,000 plus a late fee right now. But can you tell me, what exactly did my mother say when you asked for payment?" "Oh, hi, Elise." His voice was relieved. "No worries. I know you're good for it. She just said she was a little short on cash because she had to help Dean get set up with his new situation. She said you'd handle the rest of the roof later." The name dropped like a guillotine blade. Dean. I hung up after promising the transfer. I sat in the silence, nausea rising in my throat. So there it was. The money I sent to save my parents' lives from a collapsing roof had been diverted. It had been embezzled to use the correct professional terminology to fund my brother. I took a deep breath and dialed Mom. This time, I didn't let her set the tempo. "Mom," I said the moment she picked up. "I just spoke to Mr. Henderson." Silence on the other end. A heavy, guilty silence that lasted 5 seconds. "Oh," her voice dropped an octave. "Did he call you?" "I told him to wait a little longer. He makes such a fuss." "Mom," I cut her off, my voice ice cold. "I sent $7,500 in September, enough to pay the bill in full." "Why did he say you only gave him $1,500? Where is the other $6,000? Mom sighed, a sound of exhaustion, as if she were explaining quantum physics to a toddler. "Elise, you know your brother. That logistics company laid everyone off again. He lost his job. The 4th time in 2 years. He needed money to fix his car, buy a suit for interviews, and pay rent so his girlfriend wouldn't kick him out. He was desperate. I couldn't let him end up on the street." "So why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice trembling with rage. "Why did you lie and say it was for the roof? Why didn't you say Dean needs money?" And then she said it, the sentence that seared itself into my brain, the sentence that severed the last chord. "Because I knew if I said it was for Dean, you would lecture me," she said, her tone shifting to defensive accusation. "You're always so hard on him. And besides, Elise, you are strong, you're successful, you make so much money, you can handle it. You are strong." Those 3 words sounded like a curse. I remembered September. That was the month of my surgery. I was working 70-hour weeks, popping blood thinners, running Zoom meetings from a hospital bed to keep my competitors from smelling blood in the water. I was eating instant oatmeal for lunch to save time. And while I was bleeding myself dry to survive, my mother had quietly taken that blood money sent with genuine terror for their safety and handed it to a healthy 40-year-old man who refused to grow up. "You're strong." In my mother's dictionary, strong wasn't a compliment. It was a revocation of rights. It meant I lost the right to be weak. I lost the right to be cared for. Because I was strong, my feelings were irrelevant. Because I was strong, I was obligated to carry the weak. "Mom," I whispered, hot tears spilling over. "I just had heart surgery. Do you remember? I had open heart surgery." "Well, you're better now, aren't you?" she replied, impatient. "The doctor said you were fine. Look, let's not dwell on the past. The important thing is that Dean is stabilizing. We are family, Elise. Family helps each other, those who have more cover for those who have less." I hung up. I couldn't listen to another word of that twisted manifesto. I stared at my computer screen. That $6,000 wasn't just money. It was a betrayal of the most fundamental trust. It showed me my true position in this family. I wasn't a member. I was an insurance policy. I was a sovereign wealth fund. And worse, I was the alternative financial system. They didn't need to save, didn't need to strive, didn't need to own their mistakes, because the Elise Fund was always there. This dependency wasn't accidental. It was a parasitic system nurtured over decades. They fed on my energy, my finances, and now my literal life force. And they thought it was their right. They thought I owed them this, simply because I had committed the cardinal sin of succeeding and escaping Toledo. I looked out the window at the storm clouds gathering over the Rockies. The anger inside me wasn't a fire anymore. It had calcified into a glacier cold, hard, and unstoppable. The roof scandal was just the tip of the iceberg. If they could lie about $6,000 for a roof, then the call yesterday about the $12,000 for Dad's rent. How much of that was real? For the first time, I asked a question my conscience had never allowed before. Is Dad really being evicted? Or is this another bailout for Dean, dressed up in my father's misery? The suspicion hurt like acid, but it was necessary. It was the antidote to my own stupidity. I opened Henderson's email again and wired him the missing $6,000. I paid the debt to save the Warren name, not to save my mother. Then, I opened a new Excel file. I named it Project Liberation. I wasn't sending the $12,000. Not yet. September had taught me a brutal lesson. Unchecked kindness is not love. It is fuel for deception. And I, Elise Warren, was out of fuel. My phone buzzed. A text from Mom. Dad is pacing the floor. Did you send the money yet? I looked at the message, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty. I only felt the cold clarity of someone realizing they are being pickpocketed by the person hugging them. The break was coming. I could feel it in the air pressure. And this time, I was going to be the one to snap the bone. That week stretched out like a wire pulled to its absolute limit, humming with a tension that threatened to snap at any moment. The call for $12,000 on Monday was the opening shot. The revelation of the embezzled roof money on Wednesday was the widening crack. But the fatal blow, the final hammer strike that shattered the wall of patience I had meticulously built over 3 decades, arrived on Friday night, in the form of a seemingly harmless text message. That evening, Denver glittered like a black diamond dusted with gold. I was standing in the ballroom of the Grand Hyatt, attending the annual Western Financial Gala. This wasn't just a party. It was a battlefield camouflaged in velvet and champagne. Tonight, I was the victor. The merger project I had bled for over the last 6 months was being officially announced. I wore an emerald green gown with a high slit, armoring myself in the aesthetics of absolute power. Partners circled me, raising crystal flutes in toast. "Elise, you're a wizard," the CEO of the acquisition target said, his eyes filled with grudging respect. "Nobody thought you could restructure that debt so quickly?" I smiled, a gesture practiced to perfection in the mirror. "It's just a matter of seeing what others overlook," I replied, sipping my Perrier. I wasn't drinking alcohol. I needed a razor-sharp mind for the acceptance speech I was due to give in 20 minutes. But beneath the silk and the industrial-strength poise, the phone in my jeweled clutch was buzzing, a rhythmic, persistent vibration, like a ghost knocking from the inside of a coffin. I excused myself to the balcony, stepping away from the string quartet playing Shostakovich's Waltz No. 2. The December air rushed in, slapping my face with the scent of snow and false freedom. I opened the phone. 3 missed calls from Mom, and 1 picture message. The image loaded slowly on the screen. When it finally resolved, I felt my stomach contract as if I'd been punched. It was the living room in Toledo, but it wasn't the gloomy, poverty-stricken room I remembered. On the old, scratched table, now covered with a pristine white cloth, sat a feast. Large trays of barbecue ribs, a towering custom cake, and sitting arrogantly in the center, a bottle of Johnny Walker Blue Label Scotch. Sitting at the head of the table, wearing a red tie that was slightly askew, was Dean. He was laughing, mouth wide open, raising a glass high. Dad sat next to him, looking small and forced. Mom had her arm wrapped around Dean's neck, her face glowing with a pride she had never, not once, directed at me. The text beneath was brief. "Come home, honey. Party to celebrate. Dean getting the new job at the warehouse. Everyone is waiting." "You should be here." I stared at the screen. Dean had a new job. Good. That was good news. But my analyst brain, the brain that had just been called a financial wizard, immediately spotted the lethal discrepancies. On Monday, Mom had called, weeping, claiming Dad was about to be evicted for lacking $12,000. She said they were destitute, desperate, down to their last dime. On Friday, they were throwing a party where that single bottle of scotch cost at least $200. And that spread of food, another few hundred, easy. Where did the money come from? The answer surfaced. clear and cruel. My money. It was the $6,000 she had skimmed from the roof repair. Or maybe the money I sent last month for Dad's heart medication. The source didn't matter. The reality remained unchanged. They were using the very funds sent under the guise of emergency relief to fund a celebration. They were toasting Dean's minor victory with my sweat and blood, all while hanging another $12,000 demand over my head like a guillotine. My fingers trembled as I hit the call button. I couldn't hold it back anymore. "Mom," I said the moment she picked up, the noise of laughter bleeding through the line. "I'm looking at the picture. Isn't it beautiful?" Her voice was jubilant, slightly slurred. She'd been drinking. "Your brother is so smart. He nailed the interview on the first try." "I told you. Dean just needed a chance. Come home, Elise. You can catch a red eye. Your brother wants you to congratulate him." "Mom," I said, my voice low and dangerous, trying not to scream on the balcony of a 5-star hotel. "I am at the most important signing ceremony of my year. I cannot come home. And more importantly, where did you get the money for this party? You told me Dad was being evicted. If you have money for Blue Label scotch, why aren't you paying the rent?" The laughter on the other end paused, but didn't stop. Mom's voice turned sharp, adopting that familiar defensive tone. "Why do you always have to count every penny? Elise, today is your brother's big day. He needs encouragement." Uncle Mike gave him the bottle. I knew for a fact Uncle Mike was too cheap to buy a bottle over $20, and the food didn't cost that much. Your work will always be there. Your company won't collapse if you miss one night. But this is family. This is when your brother needs you. Your work will always be there. That sentence pierced me, sharper than any shard of glass. To her, my career, the thing I had traded my health, my relationships, and my youth for, was just a thing that's always there. A faucet you turn on to get cash. She didn't value my effort because she never had to witness the struggle. She only felt entitled to the fruit. But what hurt more, what cracked my chest open in the cold night air, was the realization of ownership. She didn't invite me because she missed me. She invited me because my presence would legitimize the party. I was the golden sponsor. My absence was like a broken ATM at a grand opening, and Dean, he was drinking liquor bought with my money, eating ribs bought with my money, basking in a safety net woven from my finances. Yet he was the hero. And me? I was just the invisible logistics manager. "Listen to me," I said, my voice cracking, losing the cool control of the vice president. "I'm not coming. I am never coming home for something like this again. You took the roof money to throw this party, didn't you?" "Don't you dare accuse me," Mom shouted, aggression rising to cover the truth. "You are so selfish. Your brother just got back on his feet, and you want to kick him down. You make millions of dollars, and you begrudge your family a few crumbs. I am disappointed in you, Elise. You've changed. Money has blinded you." I went silent. In that moment, between the howling wind of Denver and the screaming voice from Ohio, something inside me broke. It wasn't a loud explosion. It was the sound of a dry branch that had borne too much weight for too long. Snap, clean, final. I realized they didn't just see me as a wallet. It was worse. They saw me as communal property. They were communists in a microsystem where all my achievements were confiscated to be redistributed to the needs of the collective specifically. Dean's needs. In their eyes, I didn't have the right to own my life. I owed it to them. "Yes, Mom," I whispered, tears sliding down my face, but my voice was suddenly dry as dust. "I have changed." I hung up. I didn't go back to the ballroom. I couldn't face the lights, the hollow toasts, the bubbling Perrier. I walked straight to the elevator, down to the parking garage, and got into my cold Audi. I threw the phone onto the passenger seat. The screen lit up with a new text from Mom. "Don't turn off your phone. Send the $12,000 now. The landlord is calling your father." The audacity had reached its peak. Drinking a toast with one hand, holding a knife to my throat with the other, I sat in the dark garage, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I thought of myself at 13, standing alone on a stage. I thought of myself at 37, lying alone in the ICU, and I looked at the image of Dean tonight, surrounded by food, wine, and love, all paid for by my solitude. The anger wasn't hot anymore. It had transmuted into something else, revulsion. And from that revulsion, a ruthless decision was born, necessary for survival. I couldn't take it anymore. I wasn't just tired, I was exhausted. This ATM was officially out of order. I started the engine. The roar echoed in the empty concrete cavern. I didn't drive toward my cold penthouse. I couldn't go back to those glass walls tonight. They would suffocate me. I needed to go somewhere, anywhere, as long as it wasn't here, as long as it was away from the ghost of Ohio. I drove out of the garage, merging onto the dark expanse of I-70, heading west toward the black silhouette of the mountains. I didn't know where I was going. I only knew that if I didn't run now, if I sent that $12,000, I would die. Not a biological death, but the death of my soul. And tonight, for the first time in 37 years, Elise Warren chose to live. Real Elise, in a dark room in the basement of my soul. I had told her to shut up. I had starved her. I had forced her to work until she collapsed. All to serve a single purpose, to buy the applause of people who didn't know how to clap. I had waited. Oh God, I had waited so long. I waited for the day Mom would look into my eyes and see me. Not a walking ATM. I waited for Dad to, just once, stand in front of Mom and say, "Stop asking her for things. She's tired." I waited for my brother to say, "Sis, you've done enough. Let me handle this." I had lived my life like a passenger stranded in an airport departure lounge, waiting for a flight that was never scheduled to leave. I had postponed my happiness, postponed my travels, postponed romantic love, postponed even the healing of my physical heart, all to maintain the fragile hope that if I sacrificed enough, they would eventually love me enough. But tonight, on this desolate highway, that illusion died. I lifted my head, staring into the darkness through the windshield, my breath condensed into small, ghostly clouds of white vapor. I remembered a quote from a therapist I had seen on TV once, a phrase I had heard but never truly understood: "You cannot get blood from a stone." That was my tragedy. I had spent my life trying to squeeze blood from stones. My parents, they weren't withholding love to punish me. They simply didn't have it. They were empty. My mother had been hollowed out by the trauma of poverty until her soul was nothing but a cave filled with survival instincts. My father had been atrophied by cowardice until he was incapable of protecting anyone, even himself. They couldn't give me validation, understanding, or gratitude because they didn't possess those things. You cannot pour water from a dry pitcher. And yet, what had I done? I had banged my head against that dry pitcher 1,000 times, begging for a drop, and then blamed myself when my head bled. But no water came out. My own stupidity hurt more than their cruelty. My phone, tossed carelessly on the passenger seat, suddenly lit up. Another text, maybe a threat, maybe a plea, maybe another masterclass in emotional manipulation. The blue light pulsed in the car like a demon's eye. I picked it up. My thumb hovered over the cold glass. I looked at the names in my recent history: Mom, Dad, Dean. The names that defined my existence, the invisible chains that bound me to a toxic harbor. I didn't open the message. I didn't want to know what they had to say anymore. Their words were just white noise, now static interference on a channel I was no longer subscribed to. I held down the power button, slide to power off. My finger traced the line on the screen. A simple motion. It took less than a second. The screen went black. In that moment, absolute silence wrapped around the car. No more vibrations, no more notification lights, no more connection. For the first time in years, I was completely, utterly alone. But strangely, this aloneness didn't feel terrifying like the loneliness I felt in the penthouse or in a crowded room. The loneliness before was the absence of others. This aloneness, this was the presence of myself. I took a deep breath. The air in the car was freezing, but it tasted clean. I looked in the rearview mirror, meeting the gaze of the woman with swollen eyes reflected there. "Hello, Elise," I whispered, my voice raspy. "It's been a long time." I didn't know what tomorrow looked like. I didn't know where I would sleep tonight. I didn't know if Dad would actually be evicted, though my rational brain now whispered that he wouldn't, They always found a way to survive when I wasn't there. But I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't turning the car around. I reached out and restarted the engine. The German engineering roared to life, the headlights cutting a clean, bright path through the thick Colorado night. I shifted into drive. The tires crunched against the gravel as I pulled back onto the highway. I left the $12,000 behind. I left the title of good daughter behind. I left 30 years of false hope behind. Ahead of me was darkness, but it was the darkness of freedom. And I began to drive, deeper into the mountains, into the dead zones where no signal could reach, to begin the hardest journey of a human life, learning how to be friends with myself. The sun that rose the next morning didn't look like the sun I knew. Watching it through the cheap, synthetic curtains of the roadside motel where I had crashed for 4 hours, it looked pale, washed out, but undeniably real. It was no longer filtered through the tint of a corporate office window or the haze of my own exhaustion. I woke up with a headache, a stiff neck, and a clarity so sharp it felt like I had swallowed a diamond. For 37 years, my life had been a reaction. I reacted to my mother's needs. I reacted to my father's silence. I reacted to the market's volatility. I was a mirror, reflecting everyone else's light and heat, never generating my own. Today, the mirror had shattered, and I was going to pick up a jagged shard and cut myself free. I drove back to the city, but not to the office. I pulled into the underground garage of the penthouse, parked my car, and walked into my apartment. It felt like walking into a museum dedicated to a dead woman. The expensive furniture, the spotless surfaces, the air that smelled of nothing. It was a mausoleum. I didn't cry. I didn't feel sentimental. I felt efficient. I called Sarah, my assistant, at 8:00 a.m. sharp. "Elise," she answered on the first ring, panic in her voice. "Where are you?" "The legal team is waiting for the debrief on the gala." "Sarah," I said, my voice steady, "I am taking a leave of absence, effective immediately." What? For how long? Marcus will flip out." "Is it your heart?" "It is my heart," I said, though not in the way she understood. "Tell Marcus it's indefinite. I have accrued 6 months of vacation and sick leave over 10 years. I'm cashing it in. If he has a problem with that, he can talk to HR about the labor laws regarding medical recovery. I sent the files for the handover. You're capable. Sarah, you can handle this." I hung up before she could argue. One cord cut, then began the packing. I didn't pack the power suits. I didn't pack the stilettos. I didn't pack the gala gowns. I walked past the walk-in closet filled with tens of thousands of dollars of executive armor without a second glance. I packed jeans. I packed thick wool sweaters. I packed the hiking boots I had bought 5 years ago and never worn. I packed my books, the ones I loved, not the ones I read to sound smart at dinner parties. I packed my journal. I packed only 2 suitcases. The rest, the furniture, the art, the trappings of status I left behind. They were props for a play I was no longer starring in. By noon, I was in the car, driving northwest. I had found the place online during a frenzy of research in the motel room at 3:00 a.m. It was a cabin in Boulder Canyon, tucked away near the base of the Flatirons. It wasn't a luxury retreat. It was a 1970s A-frame with a wood-burning stove and a deck that overlooked a rushing creek. It was small, it was imperfect, and it was exactly what I needed. As I drove up the canyon road, the cell reception began to drop bars, and with each lost bar, I felt my shoulders drop an inch. When I arrived, the air hit me first. It smelled of pine needles, damp earth, and snowmelt. It was messy and organic, a stark contrast to the sterilized air of the penthouse. I unlocked the door with a physical key, not a key card, not a biometric scanner, and stepped inside. The floorboards creaked. The windows were single pane and slightly drafty, but the sound of the creak was a white noise rush that instantly drowned out the phantom ringing of telephones in my head. I set my suitcases down. Now came the hardest part, the administrative execution of my old self. I sat at the small, scarred wooden table in the kitchen. I took my SIM card out of my iPhone. That tiny chip contained every contact, every demand, every tether to Ohio. I snapped it in half. I inserted a new prepaid card I had bought at a gas station, a new number, a number that nobody in Toledo possessed. Then, I opened my laptop and composed an email. I addressed it to Mom, Dad, and Dean. I didn't write it with anger. I wrote it with the cool, detached precision of a contract lawyer. Subject updates regarding my contact information and financial support. Mom, Dad, Dean. I am taking time away to focus on my health. My doctors have advised that I remove all sources of stress, or my heart condition could become fatal. Therefore, I will be unreachable by phone for the foreseeable future. Effective immediately, the emergency financial requests stop. I will no longer respond to crises regarding rent, repairs, or debts. I have set up an automated transfer of $500 per month to Dad's account for groceries. This is a fixed amount. It will not increase. If you overspend it, there will be no more until next month. I have paid the rent on the house through the end of the year. After January 1st, the rent is your responsibility. Dean is capable of working, and Dad receives a pension. You must budget accordingly. If Dean loses his job, do not call me. If the car breaks down, do not call me. If you need someone to blame, you can blame me, but I will not be there to hear it. I love you, but I cannot carry you anymore. I have to carry myself. Elise. I hovered over the send button. My heart hammered against my ribs, thump, thump, thump. The conditioning of a lifetime screamed at me. You are abandoning them. You are cruel. What if they starve? What if Dad has a heart attack? But then I remembered the party. I remembered the Blue Label scotch. I remembered the $6,000 roof money. They wouldn't starve. They were survivors. They had simply forgotten how to survive because I had made it too easy for them to be helpless. By cutting them off, I wasn't killing them. I was forcing them to walk. I pressed send. The email whooshed away. I sat there, waiting for the sky to fall. I waited for the police to kick down the door. I waited for the guilt to crush me. But the sky didn't fall. The creek kept rushing over the stones. A blue jay landed on the deck railing, twitched its tail, and flew away. I stood up and walked to the suitcase to unpack. As I folded my sweaters and placed them in the cedar drawers, a profound realization washed over me, gentle as the afternoon light filtering through the trees. I wasn't running away. For the last 24 hours, I had accused myself of fleeing. But that wasn't true. Running away implies you are leaving your home. Ohio wasn't my home. The penthouse wasn't my home. I was stepping out. I was stepping out of a small, suffocating room that they had locked me in when I was 9 years old. The room was labeled the strong one. It was a room with no windows, where the air was recycled anxiety, and the only furniture was a heavy yoke I was expected to pull. They had told me that if I left that room, the family would collapse. They had told me that my only value lay in staying in that room and working the machinery of their survival. But I had just walked out the door, and the world was still turning. I looked at my hands. They were shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of liberation. For the first time in my life, I wasn't Dean's sister. I wasn't the dutiful daughter. I wasn't the vice president. I was just a woman in a cabin by a creek. I made myself a cup of tea, cheap Earl Grey, from a box I found in the cupboard. I walked out onto this deck, wrapped in a blanket, and sat on a wooden rocking chair. The sun was setting behind the flatirons, painting the jagged rocks in hues of violet and burnt orange. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, because for the first time, I wasn't looking at it through the lens of how much it cost to live here, or who I needed to share it with to feel valid. I took a sip of tea. It was hot. It was simple. It was mine. I had reclaimed the copyright to my own existence. The narrative from this page forward belonged to me. There would be fallout, I knew that. There would be rage from Ohio. There would be silence. But as the first star appeared in the twilight sky, I realized I didn't care. Let them rage. Let them scream into the void where I used to be. I was busy living. The first 3 days in the cabin were a detox, not from alcohol or caffeine, but from the cortisol that had been coursing through my veins for decades. I spent my mornings sitting on the deck, wrapped in a wool blanket, watching the creek rush over smooth gray stones. I was learning to breathe again. But a toxic system does not let its power source unplug without a fight. Before I snapped my SIM card in half, my phone had logged 14 missed calls from my mother in the span of 2 hours. 14. I hadn't listened to the voicemails then, but the transcripts had synced to my cloud account, which I accessed on my laptop on the 4th morning. I read them with a morbid curiosity, like a scientist examining a virus under a microscope. Voicemail. 1. Elise, pick up. The landlord is here. Share voicemail. You are killing your father, do you hear me? If he has a stroke, it's on your hands. Voicemail 9. I don't know who you think you are, running off like that. You think you're better than us. Voicemail 14. You ungrateful bitch, answer the phone. I scrolled through the wall of text. I looked for 3 specific words. Are you okay? Or perhaps, how is your heart? They weren't there, not once. In 14 desperate attempts to reach me, not a single second was wasted on concern for my survival. The only thing that mattered was the disruption of the supply chain. I was an appliance that had stopped working, and she was banging on the side of it, trying to jar the coins loose. I closed the tab. I felt a coldness in my chest, but it wasn't pain. It was the numbness of a limb that had been dead for a long time, finally falling off. I thought I was safe behind my new number and my digital moat, but I had forgotten about Dean. On Thursday afternoon, a notification popped up on my work email, the only channel I hadn't blocked because I needed to correspond with HR about my leave. From Dean. Warren82@gmail.com. Subject: Mom is going crazy. The car. My hand hovered over the mouse. My brother never emailed me. He only texted when he wanted a PlayStation or borrowed cash. I opened it. Elise, look, I don't know what game you're playing, but Mom is tearing the house apart. She says you cut her off. She's screaming about the rent money you didn't send. She told me to tell you that if you don't wire the $12,000 by tomorrow noon, she's going to sell Dad's Chevelle to the scrap guy down on Route 20. She says it's the only way to get the cash to stop the eviction. I'm just the messenger here. Okay, don't blame me. I told her it was extreme, but you know how she gets. If you want to save Dad's car, you better fix this. I wash my hands of it. Dean. I stared at the screen, my breath hitching in my throat. The Chevelle. It was a 1972 Chevrolet Chevelle Malibu, rusted around the wheel wells, painted a faded sunburst orange. It wasn't worth much on the market, maybe $2,000 as scrap, but to my father, it was everything. It was the car he bought before he got married. It was the only things in that house that was solely his. He spent every Sunday polishing it, tuning the engine, sitting in the driver's seat, listening to old baseball games on the radio. It was his sanctuary. It was his time machine to a version of himself that wasn't beaten down by life. The thought of Mom selling it for scrap metal just to pay a landlord, it made me physically ill. It was a violation so personal, so vindictive, that it bypassed my logic and went straight to my heart. My finger twitched toward my banking app, save the car. The instinct screamed at me, just pay the ransom. Don't let them take his last joy. I almost did it. I almost wired the money. But then I stopped. I looked at the rushing creek outside. I remembered the roof scandal. I remembered the lies. Wait, something didn't add up. Dad would never let her sell the car. He was passive, yes, but that car was his 3rd child. He would sleep in it before he let her crush it. And the eviction. Mom said the landlord was there on Monday. It was Thursday. If the landlord had been there to kick them out, why were they still in the house to threaten me? I needed to talk to Dad, but I couldn't call the house phone. Mom guarded it like Cerberus. And Dad didn't have a cell phone. Mom said they were too expensive. Then I remembered Mrs. Gable. Gable lived next door. She was a nosy, kind-hearted widow who spent her days gardening near the fence line she shared with my parents. I had her number from years ago when I sent her a gift basket to check on them during a blizzard. I dialed the number. My hands were shaking. Hello? An elderly voice answered after 4 rings. Mrs. Gable, it's Elise Warren from next door. Oh, Elise, how are you, dear? I haven't seen you since Christmas. You sound... Are you crying? I'm fine. Mrs. Gable, listen, this is an emergency. Is my father outside? I really need to speak to him, but I can't call the house. Let me look out the window, she said, the phone rustling. Yes, he's there. He's waxing that orange car of his, again. He loves that thing more than he loves his lawn. He was waxing the car. Mrs. Gable, I said, my voice trembling. Could you please take the phone to him? Tell him it's Elise. Tell him it's urgent, please. Of course, dear. Hold on. I heard the screen door open. I heard the crunch of footsteps on grass. I heard the wind blowing in Toledo. Frank. It's Elise on the phone for you. A pause, then the fumbling sound of the phone being passed. Elise. Dad's voice, soft, confused, and heartbreakingly familiar. Is everything okay? Mom said you were on a big business trip in Europe and couldn't be reached. Europe. She told him I was in Europe. Dad, I said, gripping the edge of my table so hard my knuckles turned white. I'm not in Europe, I'm in Colorado. Dad, listen to me carefully. Is the landlord there? The landlord, he laughed, a dry, confused chuckle. Mr. Henderson. No, I haven't seen him since he came to fix the gutter last week. Why, Dad, the rent. Did you pay the rent this month? Of course I did, he said, sounding offended. Mailed the check on the 1st, just like I have for 40 years. Cleared the bank on Tuesday. Why are you asking about the rent? The world stopped spinning. The silence in the cabin was sudden and absolute. It was the sound of a universe imploding. You paid the rent, I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. So, you aren't being evicted. There's no notice on the door. Evicted? Good Lord, Elise, who told you that? Then his voice dropped, filled with a sudden, sharp suspicion. Did your mother call you? She said you were 3 months behind. She said they were going to kick you out. She asked for $12,000. Dad. I heard a sound I had never heard from my father before. A sharp intake of breath, followed by a low, guttural groan of pure shame. 12,000, he muttered. Oh, Martha. Oh, Martha, what have you done? And the car. I pressed on, tears streaming down my face, now tears of rage, tears of relief, tears of horror. Dean emailed me. He said Mom was going to sell the Chevelle today if I didn't send the money. Sell my car. Dad's voice rose, trembling with a rare anger. She wouldn't dare. The title is in my pocket. The car is sitting right here. I just bought new wax for it. She lied, I whispered. It was all a lie. Elise, Dad's voice broke. She wants to remodel the kitchen. She's been talking about it for months. Those granite countertops she saw in the magazine. I told her we couldn't afford it. I told her no. The kitchen. It wasn't an eviction. It wasn't hunger. It wasn't life or death. It was granite countertops. My mother had invented a scenario where her husband was going to be homeless, where his beloved car was going to be crushed, where her daughter was forced to panic wire $12,000, all because she wanted a kitchen renovation she couldn't afford. She had weaponized my love for my father. She had held a gun to his head in my imagination, knowing that was the only way to make me open the vault. Dad, I said, my voice surprisingly steady now. The tears had stopped. The confusion had vanished. In its place was a clarity as cold and hard as the Rockies outside my window. I need you to listen to me. I am not sending any money. Not for the rent, not for the car, not for the kitchen. Don't, he said firmly. Don't you send a penny. I need to go inside, Elise. I need to talk to your mother. Dad, wait. I'm sorry. Elise, he whispered. I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know she was doing this to you. I know, Dad. I love you, honey. I love you too. The line clicked dead. I sat there, holding the phone, staring at the wood grain of the table. For years, I had thought my family was a tragedy. I thought we were victims of a hard economy, of bad luck, of health issues. I thought my role was the hero in a sad story. But I was wrong. We weren't a tragedy. We were a con. My mother wasn't a poor woman trying to survive. She was a predator. She had looked at my success and seen prey. She had looked at my heart, my literal, surgically repaired heart, and seen a lever she could pull to dispense cash. She didn't care if the stress killed me, as long as the renovation was paid for before the funeral. And Dean, he knew. I'm just the messenger. He knew there was no eviction. He was complicit in the extortion, hoping for a cut of the proceeds. A strange sensation washed over me. I expected to feel devastated. I expected to feel broken. Instead, I felt lighter than air. The guilt, that heavy, black stone I had carried in my stomach for 20 years, vaporized. You feel guilty when you abandon people who need you. You don't feel guilty when you stop a thief from robbing you. The ambiguity was gone. The maybe they really need it. Maybe I'm being selfish. Doubts were gone. The gray fog had lifted, revealing the sharp, ugly outlines of the truth. They didn't need me. They were exploiting me. I stood up. I felt tall. I felt solid. I opened my laptop again. I didn't email Dean back. I blocked his address. Then I logged into my bank account. I canceled the $500 monthly stipend I had set up for Dad 2 days ago. I realized that as long as Mom controlled the house, any money I sent to Dad would be intercepted. If I wanted to help him, I would have to find another way. A way she couldn't touch. But for now, the tap had to run completely dry. I walked out to the deck. The sun was high overhead now, illuminating the snow on the peaks. The air was crisp and biting. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with oxygen that felt, for the first time, like it belonged entirely to me. I had lost my family today, the illusion of them, at least. But as I watched a hawk circle the blue sky, hunting for its own survival, I realized what I had gained. I had gained the truth, and the truth, however brutal, is the only foundation upon which you can build a life that doesn't collapse. I was an orphan now, in every way that mattered. And I had never felt so free. Time works differently at 8,000 feet. In the city, time was a currency I spent frantically, always overdrawn, always borrowing minutes from sleep to pay for deadlines. Here, in the shadow of the Flatirons, time became a physical substance. It was thick, slow, and abundant, like the heavy snow that blanketed the roof of my A-frame cabin. 3 weeks had passed since the great severance. If you had asked Elise a month ago what she would do with 3 weeks of total isolation, she would have panicked. She would have filled the void with conference calls, market research, or, at the very least, a rigorous fitness regimen. But the Elise who woke up in the cabin didn't want to conquer the world. She just wanted to learn how to inhabit her own skin. My recovery wasn't a dramatic movie montage. It was quiet. It was messy. It was undeniably boring. And that boredom was the greatest luxury I had ever tasted. I learned to make coffee again. Not the pod machine sludge I threw down my throat at 600 a.m. while checking futures markets. I bought a cheap French press and a bag of local beans. I spent 10 minutes every morning just grinding the beans, boiling the water, and watching the grounds bloom. I sat by the wood stove, cup in hand, and did something revolutionary. I did nothing. I didn't check the news. I didn't plan the day. I just watched the steam rise and curl in the shaft of sunlight. I walked. I didn't hike to reach a summit. I walked to feel the ground. I found a trail along the creek where the ice formed intricate, lace-like patterns over the rushing water. The cold air burned my lungs in a good way, reminding me that I was alive, that my heart, my stitched, fragile, resilient heart was beating for me. And I started therapy. I found a therapist in Boulder who specialized in family trauma. We met twice a week over Zoom. She was a woman named Dr. Aris, with kind eyes and a way of asking questions that peeled back layers of my defense mechanisms like an onion. "You speak of your family like you're an employee who was fired," she said during one session. "I feel like one," I admitted. "I feel like I failed the performance review." "Elise," she said gently, "you didn't fail. You resigned from a job that was never yours to begin with. You were a child, not a venture capitalist. You were hired to be a daughter, but they put you to work as a safety net. Retiring from that role isn't a failure, it's emancipation." That word stuck with me. Emancipation. But the true turning point of these 3 weeks, the moment the healing went from theoretical to visceral, didn't happen on a therapist's screen. It happened in my inbox. I had created a new secret email address, Elise Mountains. I had given it to only one person, Mrs. Gable, the neighbor in Toledo. I told her, "If my father ever wants to talk to me without Mom knowing, let him use your computer, but only him." I didn't expect anything. I assumed Mom's grip was too tight, or Dad's fear was too deep. But on a Tuesday morning, a notification pinged. From Mary Gable via frank subject, no subject. My heart did a somersault. I sat down at the kitchen table, my hands trembling. The email was short, typed in all caps, likely because Dad didn't know how to turn the caps lock off. The spelling was imperfect. It was the voice of a man who hadn't typed a letter in 20 years. "Elise, Mrs. Gable helped me log in. I don't know how to do this well. I wanted to say I am sorry, not for the rent, but for everything. I sat in the garage yesterday and thought about the scholarship ceremony. I should have walked there. I should have been there. I didn't know you were hurting so much. I thought you were just strong. I thought you didn't need us. I was wrong. I am a weak man, Elise, but I love you. Please get better. Don't worry about us." I hid the car title. Love, Dad. I read it once, I read it twice. I thought you didn't need us. That was the sentence that broke the dam. For 30 years, I had projected an image of invincibility because I thought it was the only way to be safe. But in doing so, I had inadvertently convinced my father that I was a machine. He hadn't abandoned me out of malice. He had abandoned me out of a misunderstood assumption of my strength. And then I am a weak man. But I love you. It was the first time in his life he had admitted it. No excuses. No blaming Mom. Just a raw, unvarnished admission of his own failure. I put my head down on the rough wooden table and wept. But this time, the tears weren't the acid of resentment. They were the warm rain of relief. They were the tears of a child who finally heard the words she had waited a lifetime to hear. "I see you. I'm sorry." He couldn't fix the past. He couldn't pay me back the money. He couldn't change who he was. But that email was a bridge. It was a small, shaky plank thrown across the chasm of silence, and for now, that was enough. I spent the rest of that morning staring at the creek, the knot in my chest, the one that had been pulled tight since I was 9 years old, loosened. I realized then that my definition of peace had been wrong. I used to think peace was a destination, a place like this cabin, with trees and silence. But you can be in a silent forest and still have a war raging in your head. Real peace wasn't the sound of the wind. Peace was the absence of the flinch. It was the realization that when my phone buzzed, it wasn't a catastrophe. It was the knowledge that I didn't have to check my bank account every 4 hours to make sure it hadn't been drained. It was the profound, quiet certainty that I didn't have to buy my way into existence. I didn't have to earn the right to breathe. I could just breathe. I wasn't fully healed, I knew that. The scars on my heart, both the surgical ones and the emotional ones, were still pink and tender. I still woke up some nights with a phantom panic, reaching for a checkbook that wasn't there. I still felt a pang of guilt when I ate a good meal, wondering if they were eating well in Toledo before reminding myself that Dad had a pension and Dean had hands. I wasn't free immediately. You don't undo 30 years of conditioning in 3 weeks. But as I stood on the deck, watching a cardinal flash its brilliant red wings against the white snow, I realized I was freer than I was yesterday. And tomorrow, I will be a little freer than today. I went back inside, opened my laptop, and wrote a reply to the secret email. "Dad, thank you. I'm okay. Keep the car title safe. I love you too. Elise." I pressed send. Then I closed the laptop, put on my boots, and went for a walk. The path ahead was covered in fresh snow, unbroken and white. For the first time in my life, I was the one making the footprints. Spring arrived in the Rockies not with a whisper, but with a roar of melting snow and bursting green. And with the season, something in me finally thawed completely. 3 months into my temporary leave, I made a decision that felt less like a choice and more like a destiny I had delayed for 2 decades. I didn't return to the penthouse. Instead, I put it on the market. I sold the Eames chair, the walnut table, the glass mausoleum of my past life. With the proceeds, I didn't buy a bigger house or invest in a new startup. I bought dirt. Specifically, I bought 3 acres of rugged, pine-covered land in Estes Park, overlooking a valley that turned gold in the afternoon light. It was a dream I had buried so deep in the impossible fantasies folder of my brain that I had forgotten it was there. But when I stood on that plot, breathing in the scent of sage and sun-warmed earth, I knew this wasn't an investment. This was a foundation. I wasn't just building a house. I was building an identity. My life in the city had been defined by who I was to others. The VP, the daughter, the bank. In Estes Park, I was a stranger. And that anonymity was a blank canvas. I joined a local mountaineering club. I didn't introduce myself as Elise, the financial analyst. I introduced myself as Elise, the beginner who needs to learn how to tie a figure-8 knot. I met people who didn't care about my stock portfolio. I met Sarah, a retired teacher who taught me how to identify wildflowers. I met Jake, a carpenter who didn't ask for a loan, but instead offered to teach me how to frame a wall. For the first time, my relationships were transactional only in kindness. I trade you a batch of cookies. You trade me a lesson on navigating with a compass. It was a barter economy of the soul, and I was rich. I started investing in the only asset class I had neglected for 37 years myself. I took a photography class. I bought a second-hand DSLR and spent hours lying on the damp ground, waiting for the light to hit a columbine flower just right. I realized I had an eye for detail that spreadsheets had never utilized. I took cooking lessons. Not the microwave, a lean cuisine kind of cooking, but real, slow creation. I learned to knead dough, feeling the tension and elasticity under my palms. There was something profoundly healing about making bread, taking simple ingredients, applying pressure and patience, and watching them rise into something nourishing. And financially, I built a fortress. I set up a new retirement trust, irrevocable and untouchable. I named it the Velvet Dress Fund, a private joke for the 13-year-old girl who needed to know she would never be destitute again. Every dollar I put in there was a promise to her. You are safe. You are your own safety net. One afternoon, I drove into Denver to sign the final papers for the sale of my penthouse. I ran into Marcus, my old boss, at a coffee shop near Union Station. He almost didn't recognize me. I wasn't wearing the charcoal power suit. I was wearing jeans, a flannel shirt, and a pair of hiking boots that were scuffed with mud. My hair wasn't pulled back in a severe bun. It was loose, windblown. "Elise," he asked, squinting over his latte. "My God, is that you?" "Hi, Marcus." I smiled, a real smile, one that reached my eyes. "You look—" He paused, searching for the right word, perhaps expecting to say tired or unemployed. "You look radiant. I mean it. You look 10 years younger than when you left. The mountain air must agree with you." I laughed, and the sound surprised even me. It was lighter, deeper, free of the frantic vibrato of stress. "It's not just the air, Marcus," I said. "It's the weight." "Weight? You look like you've lost weight." "Mike? I lost about 400 pounds, I joked, thinking of the combined ghostly weight of my parents and brother that I had carried on my back. I finally put down the baggage. He looked at me with a newfound respect, or maybe just confusion. He offered me my job back. "The door is always open, Elise. We miss your brain." I thanked him, but I shook my head. "My brain is busy learning how to build a deck," I said. "And honestly, it's harder than arbitrage." Walking out of that coffee shop, I caught my reflection in the glass window. Marcus was right. My face had changed. The deep trenches of tension between my eyebrows were gone. The jaw that was always clenched had softened. My eyes didn't look like they were scanning for threats anymore. They looked like they were scanning for beauty. It turns out that when you stop using your face as a mask to hide your pain, your true features finally have permission to emerge. I drove back to Estes Park as the sun began to set. I didn't know exactly what the next 5 years would look like. I didn't know if I would ever go back to finance, or if I would become a photographer, or a baker, or just Elise who lives on the mountain. And that uncertainty, it was delicious. For the first time in my life, the future wasn't a terrifying ledger of debts I had to pay or expectations I had to meet. It wasn't a script written by my mother's fears or my father's silence. The future was a blank page. And as I turned onto the dirt road leading to my land, watching the first stars prick the indigo sky, I gripped the steering wheel not with white-knuckled panic, but with the steady hands of a captain. The ship was mine, the ocean was vast, and I was finally, the one charting the course. I am sitting on the deck of my half-finished cabin in Estes Park. The sun is dipping below Long's Peak, casting long, purple shadows across the valley. My hands are rougher than they used to be, calloused from sanding wood and gripping hiking poles, but they are steady. On the table next to me sits a mug of tea and my journal. The page is now filled not with calculations of debt, but with observations of life. It has been 6 months since I drove away from the Denver skyline. 6 months since I stopped being the ATM and started being Elise. In the silence of the mountains, I have learned the lessons that no business school, no self-help book, and certainly no Sunday dinner in Toledo ever taught me. They are hard lessons, earned with scar tissue, but they are the truest things I know. I learned that we have been lied to about love. We are taught that love is measured by how much pain you can endure for someone else. We are taught that the good daughter is the one who sets herself on fire to keep her family warm. But that isn't love. That is martyrdom. And martyrs don't survive to tell their stories. They just burn. I learned that boundaries are not walls built to shut people out. They are the structural integrity of your own soul. Without them, you are a house without a frame, destined to collapse under the weight of the first storm. Setting a boundary, saying no, saying I can't, saying this hurts me, isn't an act of war. It is an act of self-preservation. It is the door that leads you back to the only place you truly belong within yourself. I learned the most painful truth of all. You have no obligation to be the glue that holds a broken family together. For years, I thought if I just gave enough money, enough time, enough of my own life force, I could fix them. I could fix Mom's insecurity, Dad's passivity, and Dean's entitlement. But you cannot fix people who are committed to their own brokenness. You cannot save people who are drowning if they are trying to pull you under to use as a raft. If you are out there, reading this in the quiet desperation of your own duty, feeling the weight of expectations crushing your chest, let me ask you the question that saved my life. If you are living to please them, have they ever, even once, tried to understand you, not love you in their limited, taking way, but understand you? Have they asked what makes you cry? Have they asked what you dream of when you aren't solving their problems? If the answer is no, then you are not in a relationship. You are in a hostage situation disguised as a family, and if that answer is no, I implore you, take the first step. It will be terrifying. Your hands will shake. You will feel a guilt so heavy it threatens to buckle your knees. They will scream, they will accuse, they will call you selfish. Let them. Selfish is often just the word people use when you stop doing what they want. I didn't lose my family. That implies I misplaced something valuable. What I lost was the illusion. I lost the fantasy that if I just sacrificed a little bit more, they would magically transform into the parents I needed. I lost the hope of a different past, so I could finally embrace the reality of my present. My father still emails me secretly once a month. We talk about the weather, about the birds he sees in the yard. It is a small, imperfect connection, but it is real. My mother and brother are silent, blocked by the boundaries I built. And in that silence, I have found a profound, vibrating peace. Peace didn't come because I found someone to love me better. Peace came because, for the first time in 37 years, I chose to love myself. I pick up my mug and watch the first star appear in the twilight. The air is cold, but my heart, my scarred, beating, miraculous heart is warm. I am Elise Warren. I am not infinite. I am not a resource. I am just here. And finally, that is enough.